Mr. Forrester is a class of 1957. He's a third-generation Randolph-Macon and has a daughter who is a fourth-generation Randolph-Macon student. After leaving Randolph-Macon, Mr. Forrester served in the U.S. Marine Corps and retired after 28 years with Trigon Blue Cross Blue Shield. He's been active with Trinity Methodist Church and in a variety of other ways and active with the college. Thank you for coming today.
My pleasure.
And we'd really like to start with finding out how you heard about Randolph-Macon. Now, as a legacy, but how did your family come to be connected to Randolph-Macon College?
Well, I've really never heard of any other college. My grandfather, like you said, was the first generation and a minister, and there have been many ministers in the family. Then my father attended during the Depression years, and I really didn't know of another school. And I was, at that time in high school, very much of mind to be in the same old minister. So I figured this was just the perfect fit. I didn't even apply for any other college. It was just Randolph-Macon. And I was accepted and figured that's what I would do. And that's what I did.
Had your family visited the campus a lot, or were you familiar with it physically?
Not really.
Okay, can you tell us about your first visit or an early visit to the campus?
I may possibly have been on campus, but I don't remember. But I do remember the first time getting out of the car in the Murray Branch area where you would go and check in and just sort of being awed by it all. We were living in Suffolk, Virginia at the time. My father moved shortly thereafter. But we drove up from Suffolk, and it was very awe-inspiring and seeing it for the first time. Nervous, of course, but excited, but a new life, a new career as a student.
And you checked in at Mary Branch. Now, where did you live as a student?
Freshman year at Thomas Branch. I think because of our class is why they had to remodel it.
That happened several times.
A lot can take credit.
Can you tell us how you were able to afford a Randolph-Macon education? Did you have a scholarship?
Yes. Frankly, I didn't think that much about it at the time. Being a minister's son, my father was able to receive a nice scholarship, and I did things to augment, and such as working in the library. But I worked in the library for a number of years, and I never cashed a check. I just sent it to my father and said, this goes to my education. He was paying for it, and I was paying him. I didn't pay for all of the education, but quite a bit, as he said. It paid dividends down the road. He's very appreciative.
Can you tell us some about working in the library? What was the library like?
It was, well, it's hard to even think of it, seeing this beautiful facility you have here. Mainly what we did was to reshelve books that had been returned, so we were down in the dungeons. And the main thing you have to be on a watch out is every now and then they come around checking to be sure we were awake. And it was usually very chilly down in the dungeons. And since there were no women on campus or students, we didn't have to worry about taking dates or whatever down there, although quite often we got accused. But they were dungeons. I remember that.
Now, the library was in what we now call Peel Hall.
That's correct.
Where the administration is now
That's
housed.
correct. It took me a long time to get used to that because it was always the library. It was a very active place. Of course, I was very proud the day I completed my senior project and my manuscript became a part of the library, and I assume it's
It
here.
is still upstairs. I should have
Still
pulled it.
here. So that was something we did back those days that gave us a real sense of pride. I enjoyed working in the library. It was a very quiet, because you always worked in the evening and at quiet time. And then you just stayed and studied. We didn't have computers. We didn't have phones. We didn't have television. So we didn't have diversions like that.
Well, what were some of the diversions that you had? Clubs or activities?
Well, of course, Greek life was very active in those days too. And one of the problem was I liked quite a few of them, and I ended up pledging with one, but I did not follow through for various reasons. Mainly, my freshman year was quite an interesting year, but as I mentioned, I came as a ministerial student, and it's a wonderful profession. It's in my family, but towards the end of the freshman year, I began to have doubts about that. And it's not an easy decision because your father has proudly all over the conference, proclaimed his son is carrying on the tradition. And so you don't just wake up one morning and say, I'm no longer wish to pursue this career. And it was over that summer that I sort of made the decision, and it just sort of, again, it was a decision of progression. And sophomore year was a very tough year. I came very, very close to just dropping out, leaving. In fact, I had gone into Richmond, talked to Navy recruiters, and of course they were welcoming me with open arms. And we talk about closeness of professors and how you small classes and very close. And be quite frankly, a professor had enough interest in me to turn me around, kick my hindside, and say, get yourself in order and put this behind you and move on. And I did. And I graduated in 4 years. But quite frankly, he was the one.
And who was that?
Professor Richard Hasker. We lived in great fear of Professor Hasker. I mentioned Suffolk because my senior year in high school, all of our big freshmen who were seniors the year before, those who came here, the Birdsongs in particular I'm thinking of, and others, I always remember standing outside of church after sermon and after service, and they were saying, whatever you do at Randolph-Macon, and Randolph-Macon is wonderful, you're going to love it, do not get in Professor Hasker's class. Do not allow that to happen. He is horrible. And one of my favorite stories, in fact, is I gave this at the 50th class reunion last year when we were roasting each other and professors, and he was there. Sure enough, after being warned and told you will die if you are assigned his class, and sure enough, first day of classes, there I was in this huge classroom full of students, Professor Hasker. And I knew right then my college career came to an end. And as I told it then, last June, just before class started, some aide or assistant walked in and said, we have too many in this class. 4 of you will have to go downstairs to Professor so-and-so's class. And third name read was mine. And I have never been so excited to walk out of an area, and I swore then there was a God. And he looked out for me. And at the reunion, Professor Hasker happened to be there, and he had a wonderful comeback, and he said, Mr. Forrester, I think God was looking out for me. But interestingly enough, my roommate that first year was, we got along wonderful, and we became good friends. Actually, he was not my roommate. He became my roommate, but we were good friends through clericus and through this common decision that we were making and about, is this a right fit? He became a student grader and for Professor Hasker. Professor Hasker, Professor Munyon, several others were quite well known for being outstanding cooks, and they would prepare wonderful meals for students on occasion. And so that's how I got to know Professor Hasker, even though I just was scared to death of this man, and most of us were, because he had a very unique style. But after a year or so, we became friends, and later years we became very good friends. But yes, he's the one who's responsible for grabbing me by the collar. My roommate or my friend, advised him to this. Hey, this student is on the brink. So, and I'm really very appreciative of that, because I was able to finish. I did graduate, and then I went on my own choosing, to the military.
Yeah, Dr. Hasker taught English.
That's correct.
30 years later, when I was here, he was still feared. But
yes, was he feared then?
Oh yes, yes.
And revered. A lot of people hated him, but thought he was, and but said he was the best professor we had. They said that about a lot of professors.
He's
all
very
good.
demanding. But you were a history major?
That's correct.
Correct. So, who in the history department inspired you? Or is
Dr.
that just
Mabry.
an interest?
Dr. Mabry, I just really related with him. At this time now, I wasn't sure what my life profession would be, where I was going, and I didn't worry about it too much, because back then, of course, military was a good option. And the Korean War was over, the Vietnamese War had not started, but they were still military was still very powerful in people's thoughts and minds. None of my family had been military, but Dr. Mabry, I just enjoyed his classes, and as I mentioned, I had a trunk full of letters written by a sergeant in Jeb Stuart's cavalry and the 9th Virginia, and he was very interested and said I had something of great historical value. Many letters were written. Each letter told a story, and I had many letters. And he went through the war. At the very end of the war, this relative was captured and died years later. But a beautiful account, and the history of the letters themselves are fascinating. But anyway, working with him, I decided that would be a wonderful project. It would be to give a history of the letters, one, two, going through the letters, giving the historical background, the footnotes, and so forth, and then, of course, the letters themselves, which you have in your library. So that's how I got mainly to history, and Dr. Mabry. Dr. Moomaw had a lot to do with it, and others, quite a few others, of course.
You mentioned a little bit back, and I wrote it down, student graders.
Yes.
That's a new one. I haven't heard anything about student graders. What did student graders
Student graders were exceptional students. Not me, but my roommate, who, A plus or whatever. And many of the exams, quizzes, whatever, particular quizzes now, would be true or false, multiple choice, easy to grade. So each professor, if they wish, could appoint a student to grade those papers for a nice little fee. Coffee money, if you wish, but, a little fee for weekends or whatever. And so my friend became a student grader, and for years did that.
Okay. It's just hadn't read anything about student graders in any of the things I've read.
Sort of a reward for being very, very smart.
You've mentioned the one friend who was a student grader. Were there other important relationships?
My class?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes.
Or the surrounding classes?
Well, yes. Gosh, I don't know. If I start naming some, I'll leave out a lot. Being in a clericus, I got to know a lot of those members. Many of them, of course, are very active in the ministry. Most of them are retired now. Don Traylor, Dick Ferris. Oh gosh, so many more. I saw many of them just this past June. But of course, some of them got rather upset with me. Not the ones mentioned when I did make the decision to leave, which again had impact. And then I went, like I say, with the fraternity. But my grades, as I was mentioning, was not too good in the freshman year. I did turn it around, thank goodness. But you have to have a decent grade to get into the fraternity. And so most of the fraternity members, many, were clericus, and they did not like the idea of my decision, and I understood that. Maybe not as well then as now. But they were better, and I was better, so I decided to become independent. And independents were quite strong. Several of my friends wanted me to go to this or that fraternity, but in fact, it's my senior year. We had the student body the president of the student body. I was president of Walter Hines Page, and I get snickers from my daughters, but I was head cheerleader. They could not believe that their father ever did such, but that was an awful lot of fun, being a Randolph-Macon cheerleader. And I was very proud of the fact that my senior year I was a head cheerleader. It would have been much more fun now, of course, with the ladies present, but there were very few women back those days.
You mentioned the Walter Hines Page Club.
Yes.
We have information on the Walter Hines Page Club and that it existed. We don't know what it did. What was your purpose?
Dr. Mabry was a faculty sponsor. It was a history club. And Walter Hines is one of the revered graduate and so forth.
For whom the library is named.
Exactly. So we studied him. We had lectures on like Senator Scott, Scott from Pennsylvania, a graduate Randolph-Macon. He's part of our history. So it was a discussion group led by various members of the faculty. Dr. Brown, can't think of his name. Dr. George Brown Oliver was very active. In fact, quite often he gigs me about some of the meetings, and he tells me about things that I did of which I have no memory, so I can't question him. But that's basically what it was. It was a study of history. There was another group, sort of similar. I think it was forget the name of it, but it was English, sort of English students, and I can't remember that group.
Okay, we'll look that up. I mean, there was always the Washington Literary Society and the Franklin Society.
Maybe, possibly that was it.
The Washington
Something
Literary
sort of
Society brought in a lot of speakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it wasn't that. This was strictly local and driven by local professors.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you did after graduation?
Certainly. Another interesting story. I wanted to be in the Navy and wanted to be on a submarine. I don't know why, but I just thought that was fascinating. And when I graduated Randolph-Macon, I, of course, was the smartest thing on this earth because I was a senior and a graduate, knew it all. But I did not know what I wanted to do with my life, so military seemed like a wonderful option. And I remember now we lived in Martinsville, and I left Martinsville, drove to Washington to be interviewed by the Navy, got there early in the morning, and not to draw this out, but I came back home the next day. The military put me up and told my mother that I was accepted. I'm now in the Marine Corps. She cried for 2 days because they had just had that infamous incident down in Paris Island where recruits were drowned in training exercise, and that's all she could think of. The Navy was very detailed, very long and drawn out, and right off the bat I learned that my math skills were not very good, which they needed, and my eyesight was not very good, which it required. So seeing this fall apart, I was outside thinking, what am I going to do in this sharp dress Sergeant Marine Corps came up and said, let's talk, and the rest is history. I spent 6 years in the Marines, most of the time in the 1st Air Wing in Japan, and then a total of 28 years with the Reserve, and graduated. I retired as a colonel in the Marine Corps, and still very active in Marine Corps associations and so forth. But it was a wonderful decision to do that. It was not easy because, like every second weekend in May, it was Mother's Day, and my wife would always fuss because she had 3 little kids, and I had to go off and drill. And when I did retire, we looked back on it, and they were good years, and we still enjoy the benefits. Health-wise, health coverage, and my wife loves being able to go to PX without me.
So does my mother-in-law. Okay. How did you stay in contact with the college after graduation?
That's an interesting story. I've talked a lot about it because I didn't. As I have said, when I graduated, I figured, well, I paid you guys for tuition. In return, you gave me education. We're even. I'm out of here and gone. And frankly, I wasn't that close for years. Well, being overseas, immediately years afterwards, and starting my own life, getting married, raising a family. I thought it was very important to at least make my donation to Randolph-Macon. And as each year when they came out with a list of donors and next to it in parentheses how many years, I sort of liked that. When it got to 20, 25, and one year they left it out, and I'll never forget, I got very upset. Sent them canceled checks, and they apologized, and it was still in there next year. And I was very proud of myself. I remember Randolph-Macon gave them a good $25 every year. I got quite mad at Randolph-Macon on instances. Being a military personnel, I did not like the idea of a pacifist being a speaker, Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali. I didn't like that one bit and fussed at it. I don't think I'm alone when I say I was most upset when a building where we used to live in, the old gym, was torn down. A lot of us were very upset, especially when they just used it to put a fountain up. Well, the fountain is beautiful and the children love it and all, but we thought, just to say, hey, you're in the way. It was the second oldest gym in the South, and it's very, very historical. And the historical value was even heightened by the fact that many of us, myself included, after we would win a particular good game, and any win over Hampton Sydney as such, we would, break out a louder and put it against the building, go up, and in big letters, black and yellow, the score of the game. And you'd go up and put R, then someone else would put M, and someone C, then, so it would be many taking part of RMC 84, Hampton Sydney 62, let's say. So that was part of our history. That was part of our connection. And even though there was many explanations and rationale, it still made us mad. So for years, I really didn't have any connection. And then my oldest daughter graduated from high school, St. Catherine's, and went to William and Mary. And right behind her, my other daughter, Rachel, started looking around, and one school she was very interested in was Randolph-Macon. And that I was very proud. She was interested in others, but I'll never forget the day John Clonkwright, I talked to him, and I said, John, what's the status? And he said, Legacy rules, your daughter has been accepted. And I was mighty, mighty excited and proud. I'll never forget walking into the room. She didn't know. She had no idea, and she was a bit nervous. And I got fussed at because she should have heard it officially through the mail, but I said, no, she's going to hear it from her dad. You are a Yellow Jacket. I remember that well. So as I was fortunate enough to be asked to be a speaker at the scholarship dinner a couple of years ago, which I thoroughly enjoyed and surprised but honored. That day began two things. One, beginning of my daughter's connection as a Yellow Jacket, and two, beginning of my reconnection to the school as a yellow jacket, because not too long afterwards we were out here for Parents Weekend. Hey, well, let's go to a football game. Let's do that. So slowly we became involved again with Randolph-Macon, and it was a nice experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was interesting because now the campus was swarming with most attractive students who were not here when I was here. To be honest, and I told this in the scholarship dinner, I was most upset in the early 70s when women were admitted. I think a lot of us were, because we were real good at looking backwards and didn't like it one bit. Then I fast forward to that just scene. I say that same person is that happy dad who told his daughter, "You are going to be a yellow jacket." And it went on even to say that the girls, the women of Randolph-Macon are much smarter than the boys in Hampton Sydney any day. And they seemed to like that, but it was a lot of fun. Well, about this time, my father was in very poor health, and he was very fond of Randolph-Macon. They saw fit to bestow the honor upon him, a Doctor of Divinity, and he really liked that. I'll never forget when he went home that same day, our wonderful lady who lived close by came and said, "I'm so happy you're a doctor. I have this disease that I want to talk to you about." So that was his first experience as Dr. Forrester. But, we were proud of that. And when my father passed on in his will, the college knew about it, but he left a nice sum to Randolph-Macon. And I came out and met with Ned Moore, who was director of development, and got to know Ned, got to know Ike Carter and a lot of others, and discussed leaving this money and how to use it. And Ned came up with a wonderful idea, and that is, why don't you work towards a family scholarship? Because now you have a daughter who just graduated, and 4 of you here, so the Forrester Family Scholarship. And I thought it was a wonderful idea. And so that's what I did. His money was a startup for that. In the meantime, the money earned would go to buy books for the library. So over the years, I think, in fact, as I have it at home, a list of, annually I would be sent a list of books that the library purchased. And it was one of the saddest, wonderful, sweetest letters I ever got was from the librarian. When I had funded the scholarship, this no longer happened, and how happy she was that it was a funded scholarship, but how sad she was they were not going to be receiving any more books. And I really cherished that because it was fascinating, and told how much they appreciated, that gesture. And I, of course, still have that letter. So it still grows, and it's still growing, and thanks to the Frank Brown Challenge, it's going to be a sizable scholarship soon. So doing all of this, I became reconnected. Ned asked me would I be a fundraising chairman that year, and my theme could be the legacy. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. We had a very good year. We set our goal at $1 million. It had never been reached before, and we missed it by 14,000. Came close, but we didn't get there. But still, it gave us a goal, and now we're reaching it on a consistent basis. I was asked and honored to be on the Board of Associates. Became a member of the President's Society. I am on the executive committee of the Board of Associates and President's Society. I have just enjoyed coming on campus and being a part again, and with my daughter, she stayed active, and I think still is. So it's been nice. It's been especially since I retired, I could devote more time to this. So
you have 2 son-in-laws. Right?
That's true. I don't know if I can bore everybody with my favorite story, because most fellows can't say this. People like Mike Carter and Susan Donovan would probably scream and holler if they heard it again. But my oldest daughter, I told you, went to William and Mary, and her senior year, she was crowned queen of the tribe, and we were very, very proud of her. 2 years later, this young gentleman walked right into the center of the field, and she was crowned homecoming queen of Randolph-Macon College. Not many fathers can say they had two homecoming queens, my daughters. She had this. We learned later that this was probably one of the first times this young man had met her and escorted her. They all kind of just needed an escort. Well, that young man became her husband a couple years later, and a fraternity brother. A lot of at their wedding, of course, a lot of the fraternity brothers were at the wedding, and one of the brothers and my older daughter became engaged and married. So my point, both as Charlotte pointed out, both my sons are Yellow Jackets. They're both born on the same day, almost the same hour, same year. So that's easy to remember each year.
Interesting.
And his father was a Randolph-Macon graduate, and members of his family. So we have strong ties to Randolph-Macon.
We have about 50 or 60 family members from here, the Joneses and the Earlys.
John Paul Jones, the Earlys, the Birdsongs, Forresters, Wheelers.
I didn't realize all those families were connected.
My grandmother's a Wheeler, and a lot of those here. Birdsongs were connected.
I went to school with one of the Birdsongs.
Which one?
Everett.
Everett's mother is your cousin.
Okay, yeah.
So several things are named for the Birdsongs.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I had-
You have Mary Harvard. Knowed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mary Harvard works here.
Right, Mary Harvard.
And she's related to the Warnhams, and there's a,
Oh.
and we just met Paul Warnhams. So.
I have one question about the scholarship. Is it designated for a specific purpose, or is it just a general scholarship? Is it?
It is general, but it says we would like first to look at the recipient being Methodist and of the state of Virginia, but not necessary. It was not restricted, as I recall. We sort of, being as Methodist orientated and Virginia family, we said that. I remember talking about some other scholarships. I had very proud to have a hand in jump-starting the Lester Jackson scholarship and making that a reality. And I thought, hey, how neat now to make that for a black student or so forth. And they said, I was pointing out that's not the way you should do it, because that's very restrictive. It should be open to everybody, and that's what Lester would want. And I agreed. So that's sort of the idea of my scholarship. Anybody should be deserving, but if there's two to look at, and one's Methodist Virginian, that would like to be. So I'm very proud. The day that became funded, I remember I was very, very proud. And then the opportunity to really add to it, which I'm in the process of doing now, it's just a delightful way to be remembered and to remember. So.
Has the Lester Jackson scholarship been awarded yet?
It has been awarded. It's
Appreciate it.
started up again now.
I was very pleased to have a role in Lester Jackson's scholarship. Lester Jackson was a very short black man who was always in the cafeteria. He worked in the cafeteria. He was always greeting us, always with a smile. Just everybody loved Lester. He was an enduring little fella. And I remember one day I had a great big overcoat, and I got a new one for Christmas, and I didn't need it anymore. And I asked him, would he like that? Well, I've never seen such happiness and excitement. And I will never forget looking out of the window of a Mary Branch as he walked off with that new coat on. And I felt, oh, that's so great, because what a nice guy, and he can use it. So not to belabor that, he was just fondly thought of by all of us. Well, he died a couple years later, and they started Lester Jackson Scholarship Fund. And it quickly garnered monies and went up to roughly $17,000, and then just died. Then years later, while I was working towards my scholarship, in fact, it was out of a Board of Associates executive meeting, we were talking about scholarships, and said, just happened to mention, there's a lot of monies out there just sitting because they were designated for scholarships but did not become reality. And he mentioned Lester Jackson. Well, I became very upset. I said, my gracious. I said, number one, it should be. Number two, are those others like me who gave to that, realized it never became a reality. So Michael said, well, interesting enough. I said, well, look, I'll be glad to. And I did come out. I wrote a letter. We got the list of donors and just pointed out the fact, hey, did you realize this? Now, the scholarship, the monies was now worth over 30-some thousand because of interest. But actual raise is what makes a scholarship, and that's 25,000. And we were at that point, 17, so $5,000 or $6,000 short. So, according to Mike, he probably was saying this to make me feel good, but he said we had very serious doubts about this. But said, what the heck? Since you're doing it, have a go. Well, the money came pouring in. If I correct, we reached 25 in days, and I don't know what it ended up well over, but I was very, very pleased to have a hand in that. And Mike has told me they've been researching other scholarships to see if they could do sort of the same idea. So Lester was a very much part of our campus life. He wanted me to mention campus life. Those 4 years were probably some of the best of my life. The best day of my life was the day I got married. I think I should say that. The years in Japan were wonderful because I was one of the very fortunate of that time between the two conflicts, and it was a nice tourist visit. But by and large, the years around Randolph-Macon were very good. Looking back now, you wonder, like you asked, what do you do for fun? Well, there was always Mary Washington or West Hampton, but you had to leave campus for dates. Now, we had wonderful Greek weekends and so forth. We had some of the outstanding bands. I was just delighted that we would get those bands and would bring dates in. Of course, they usually always had to be in by 11 o'clock or so and sign your life away with the ladies on campus, and many times they stayed here. We had clubs like the Walter Hines Page Club. We at the time were very mischievous because we were bored. There was no Brock Center. The library was not a fun place to visit. It was where you studied. There was no fun places in town. A couple beer joints, but most of us were too young to go there and didn't. Our favorite eatery was the truck stop down the road. Is it Davis? Whatever. We would go there because they would come. They knew that, and they'd bring coupons out, and for a couple bucks, we could get a nice meal. And even though the cafeteria was pretty good, each night you had two choices: either eat it or don't. And so, with that, we usually ate it. My favorite story there is World Hunger Week, and they were talking about all the poor people all over the world who had no food to eat, or hunger. Hunger was everywhere. And the fact is, they had a display at the cafeteria of food, of yucky-looking rice and so forth, and a big sign said, "Look what some poor soul has to eat tonight." And I'll never forget the dietitian, not Flavia, Flavia Owens, I think.
No, she was the
She was librarian. That's the name I had. Came out, believe. Well, anyway, she was just crying and boo-hooing. Some enterprising student had gone through the line, got his plate, and went and switched the places. Switched with the one that was, "Look what some poor soul has to eat tonight." And of course, we laugh days and days over that, and we think we know who did it, but he never fessed up. We had fun. We were really into football games, basketball games. It was cozy. The little gym, which is still there, we thought was wonderful, but it was very small. We loved the bonfires. They had bonfires and rallies. They were a lot of fun. We thumbed. Can you imagine this today? We'd go out to Route 1 and put our thumb out and hitch a ride into Richmond and go to Millen Roads or Tallhammer, something like that, and buy a up-to-date new 33 1/3. Tommy Dorsey, Al Hurt, somebody like that. and then go to Lowe's Theater, and then go out and get a hot dog or pizza, and at night late get back out on Broad Street and then to Route 1, thumb my way back to Randolph-Macon. Can't imagine that today. And we would even on occasion thumb up to Mary Washington for our dates, and because they had nice places there. But a lot of years I was fortunate enough to have a car, so took the car in, and I enjoyed having the car right off the bat. I love sports. I was very much into sports, but I was not good. I didn't make the team, and I realized that. I was not a particularly good athlete, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I became manager of the baseball team with Hugh Stevens, and that was just a grand experience because he was a grand old man. And I'll never forget, out here on the field, we played this team called Wake Forest, who that year was the national champions of baseball, and we beat them that day. And they weren't national champions then, but they were going towards that goal. And we had some really fine teams back then. Bob Lincoln, I particularly remember. He was the catcher, and he was quite a player. I think he's in the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, and many others, of course. And basketball, I did a lot. I was talking about my car. I used to help carry the team to Washington or Hampton City. I loaded up the car, and they paid me mileage, and that was wonderful. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I enjoyed sports. I did run track, and I was pretty good in track. I did garner some points. It was a fun thing to do. Some outstanding runners, but a lot of fun. I was not a star, but I was a participant, and I enjoyed that. I worked for the radio station. I would come back from a game, a baseball game, and go right to the studio and give the report, and they would hear it firsthand. And I enjoyed that. I was on the staff of the Yellow Jacket, and I wrote a lot of articles. I don't remember what I did, but I remember, being much a part, and that was a lot of fun, and of course took up a lot of time. And the center, there really wasn't a center. About where the fountain is now, there was the bookstore, where you could buy a hot dog. The Coca-Cola machine was in there where you reached in and pull it out, and a little bit of memorabilia of the college, which I still have some. And that was not a gathering place, but you would go there. The gathering places were the fraternity houses, or in my case, the Independence, the old gym where the Independents met. My favorite memory there was watching, I can't think of his name, the guy for the New York Yankees who pitched that no-hitter, the famous no-hitter, no walks, no hits, no runs, and that was a very exciting moment. Black and white, little set, one of the few around. There were several. There were no phones in the rooms, anything like that. Each dorm had one phone at the door where you went in and went out, and the worst possible thing is to have the room next to the phone because there was no one designated to answer it. So if you were trying to sleep, to shut the phone up, the guys who lived close would have to go answer it. Then they have to go searching through the dorm to get the person who the call is for. Usually just they'll relay, "Hey, Forrester, they want you on the phone," and then they would carry it on and wake up a lot of people. So that was interesting time. But that was, if your mother wanted to call you and tell you something, that's how she got in touch with you. There were no TVs in our rooms. The main thing I had that I thoroughly enjoyed was this big troller, and playing the records. Radio, listen to radio. WRVA was mainly what we listened to. No refrigerators, anything like that. And we loved cold winters because we would put our juices and adult beverages that we snuck in on the windowsill outside so they would stay cold. And that was how, and cheese spread, things like that. So you walk in and you look up and all the windows were just loaded down with this horrible looking stuff. We were very mischievous at times. We pulled some pranks that you wonder, thinking back, that why in the world would you do that? And But you know, it's just sort of you wouldn't do it, but two would talk about it. Three would maybe say, "Let's do it," and five or six would instigate it. And that's usually how it went. We thoroughly enjoyed the bonfires. Freshman year, we had to wear our little beanies as rats, and we took that very serious. We guarded the bonfire, thinking any day Hampton Sydney was going to come and steal it all away. Of course, they could probably care less, but we didn't think so. But we do know we guarded that bonfire, and pep rallies, had pep rallies all the time, and being cheerleaders, that was a lot of fun being a part. The games were well attended. I think they are now. The spirit was good. That I enjoy coming back. We will probably be back out here Saturday night. Certainly for the Hampton Sydney game, we'll be here. So it's nice to be back in that. I played a lot of intramural sports. The biggest change is the biggest thing is not changed, and this is important, and I learned this through my daughter, is the close tie of the student to the professor. That, I think, is one of the jewels that Randolph-Macon offers, is this, that the UVAs or the VPIs or whatever just cannot offer. And listening to her talking about her favorite professors and class size, that apparently is still much in place. And I think that is a great offering that this college has. My oldest daughter was a good fit for William and Mary. But Rachel was a wonderful fit for Randolph-Macon. She was good for Randolph-Macon, but Randolph-Macon was awfully good for her. So.
Well, are there any other questions? We appreciate your time so much, and we appreciate you coming in. That was very interesting. I have all these little things written down now to look up. And we appreciate you coming and being with us today.
Well, it's certainly my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me.